Wonderful. So good afternoon and welcome to the Health and Government Operations Committee. I'm your chair, Jocelyn Pena-Melnick, and this is our committee. I want to thank the members for being present for this briefing. I'm going to go through some rules just to keep us in order. Please be mindful that all the conversations that you have may be picked up by the new closed captioning, which is amazing, but it does pick up your conversation and you may not want some stuff out there. Now that we're live, for the committee members and staff and panelists, we want to remain silent until we speak. I want to remind the public that you're not allowed to eat in the gallery or drink because our staff then will have to clean it and they have a lot of work. You will see that we drink, but that's because we work and sit here for hours and we need to stay hydrated. We're gonna have the bill briefings and I'm gonna call the following panelists for them to give a presentation. For the committee members, please adhere to our committee rules of one question and one answer from the panel. Remember that you can actually talk offline and ask questions offline. Please keep in mind that this briefing is live on YouTube and the General Assembly website. I'm gonna go through the panelists right now and I'll tell you who they are. We're going to start first with a briefing on the crematory regulation in Maryland. And we're going to have the Maryland Department of Labor, Mr. John Dove, Commissioner of Occupational and Professional Licensing. We're going to have the Executive Director of the Office of Crematory Oversight, who's going to do it virtually. We're going to have the Deputy Secretary for Public Health Services, and then we're going to have the Board of Morticians and Funeral Directors. So I'm going to start, if I may, when I call you, if you can please come up. I'm going to ask for the Maryland Department of Labor to come up, please. And also the Maryland Department of Health. Oh, you're doing this. You know what? Do you prefer to do it separately? Yeah. Okay, that sounds good. You're gonna be lonely. I thought I would give you some company. Sorry. And Deborah Rapazzo is virtual, so we're gonna bring her up as well. Okay. You can get started when you're ready.
Thank you very much. Mr. John Doe. Good afternoon, Chair Pena-Melnick, Vice Chair Cullison, and members of the Health and Government Operations Committee. My name is John Dove, and I am the Commissioner of Division of Occupational and Professional Licensing under the Maryland Department of Labor. Online with me is Debbie Rapazzo, our Executive Director for the Office of Cemetery Oversight, OCO. Debbie has been on sick leave, but is joining to answer any of your questions. I also have our counsel with me for OCO, Matt Venuti, who is sitting behind me, should any questions require his assistance.
Why don't you come up and sit next to him, please? I'm sure he will really appreciate your company here.
Let's hope I don't need you. As you see this slide, the Office of Cemetery Oversight is a very small staff. We have our Executive Director, Ms. Rapazzo. We have one investigator. We have a licensing specialist, and we have a financial administrator. Currently, the licensing specialist and the financial administrator positions are vacant. We'll be working on those. The financial administrator is a contract position and is part-time. So very small staff, as you can see. Make sure our slides are in order. They are out of order. We're okay here. There are a total of 47 regulated crematories in Maryland. 42 of them are regulated by the Maryland Board of Morticians and Funeral Directors with the Maryland Department of Health. To spell this out, if a majority of the crematory is owned by an individual licensed by the Board of Morticians, then they are the person that is where they end up licensed at. 5 crematories are regulated by the Office of Cemetery Oversight. All 5 of those that we do oversee were inspected this past year with no significant findings. Currently, we also license 21 crematory operators. I'll go back here. In August of 1997, the Maryland legislature passed legislation to create the Office of Cemetery Oversight. Laws and regulations for the office can be found under Title V of the Business Regulation Article of the Maryland Annotated Code. We're here to assist consumers and permit holders and registrants. The office's website provides links to these as well as many more topics of interest. Skip through here. So anyway, although the Office of Cemetery Oversight hasn't received any crematory complaints filed by consumers, we would like to share our process with you. Complainants can go to the Office of Cemetery Oversight website to download our complaint form, or they can contact our office and have one mailed or emailed to them. This is a copy of our complaint form. Once a consumer either calls us or emails us, we send that out to them, and they can send that back to us. Once they've gotten that, we'll send it out. We'll acknowledge receipt of their complaint, and then we'll go start the process with working on it. This is a copy of the form that we actually send to the complainant. They have 30 days to get back to us. If the complaint that we received we believe is urgent, that we absolutely need to go out and investigate it right away, while we're waiting on their response, we will still go ahead and start the investigation and start looking into it. And again, to reiterate, this is our process here. We get the complaint, we log it in, the complaint is reviewed and processed by our investigator. Assuming that it needs an investigation, we'll do an on-site inspection, go through the process, and then from there we'll go through our closing review, which is deciding if any actions need to be taken by our executive director. And in this case, for us, the executive director is the authority. We have an investigator. Our executive director will make the decision on what needs to be done in that situation. Again, once the complaint is closed, we'll reach out to the permit holder and let them know what our final disposition is, and we'll also reach out to the complaint, the person that filed the complaint, to let them know what the disposition was of the actual complaint. Again, potential sanctions and resolutions. Our options are emergency revocation and suspension power. The OCO may order summarily the suspension of a license if we find that the public health, safety, or welfare imperatively requires emergency action, and that is very rare. For non-emergency complaints, the OCO may hold hearings on any violations of its statutes or regulations. We may also issue a cease and desist order for violations of the title. We may deny a license or permit, reprimand a license, or suspend or revoke a license. OCO can also fine a maximum of $5,000 for each violation and $500 for each day a violation continues. OCO can also seek an immediate restraining order in circuit court to prohibit the person from engaging in the operation of any cemetery, crematory, reduction facility, or burial goods business itself. Again, all inspections are done by our investigator with the oversight of the executive director. Once the inspection has been completed, with including photos, everything else that needs to be done, a meeting is scheduled to address the permit holder with completed inspection documents. Any concerns are identified, a meeting is held with the permit holder, and if the investigator on site finds anything criminal, then that'll be forwarded for criminal investigation. Again, on behalf of the Office of Cemetery Oversight and the Maryland Department of Labor, we'd like to thank you for your time to discuss this work. Thank you so much.
For the work you do. I'm going to open it up for possible questions, okay? Are there any questions for this panelist? Delegate Kaiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
Mr. Dove, I have two unrelated questions, both relatively brief. You highlighted on the second slide the limited number of staff and I guess the 2 openings. If you had those openings filled, would that be enough? And if not, was there a budget request on to the governor's office to get more staff for this Office of Cemetery Oversight?
For what we do right now, that staff is enough. We've been able to get the job done, but we will determine if we need more inspectors in the future. But right now, with the amount of complaints that we get, we've been able to handle those. We have been handicapped because of the person that is missing currently. Again, another personnel situation with someone with a illness, and so once we get that filled, I think we'll be up to speed.
Thank you. My second question?
Absolutely.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a bill last year on green burial. I don't believe the Office of Cemetery Oversight has done anything with the law of the state of Maryland in terms of enacting regulations. And since you described that 5 of the crematories are under you and 42 are under the Board of Morticians, and maybe that you all aren't the problem we're here about today, where is the movement on those regulations?
Debbie, would you like to answer that one for me? Or you like me to?
We're not able to hear
you,
Debbie. Can you?
I believe you're talking and referencing the alkaline hydrolysis. That was the first section of regulations that we looked at. And we are working with our sister agency, the Board of Morticians and funeral directors, to have that done. We put several drafts together, and we do have a pending draft that hopefully we'll be able to proceed forward very shortly. After these hearings and stuff, we're hoping that that can be resolved and they can be sent out for public comment.
Okay, thank you. The person who had come to me for that bill had gotten 0 answers, so I had to ask today. Thank you, Madam Chair.
I have one question for you. It's good music, right? If you could tell us, because I don't think I heard correctly, did you say you have not received any complaints? Or if you have received complaints, how many do you receive, let's say, yearly or in a month?
We have not received any complaints on the crematories.
Any?
Any.
In what period of time?
This would go back last 2 years. Debbie, would you have that information?
I'm sorry, I'm having a really hard time. It's very low. We have not had any complaints for our crematories. Of course, we would handle them as we would handle any other complaint that comes into our office. We've handled over 127 complaints, I believe, for our cemeteries and burial goods businesses. We do handle a lot of inquiries that we receive, and they are reported out, of course, to the General Assembly each year.
All right, thank you. And you do the investigation when there is a complaint, correct?
Correct.
Yes.
And who does the inspections?
Okay,
investigators.
My inspections are handled by my investigator. She goes out and performs the inspections.
Okay, and how often do you do inspections on these, how many crematories? 42 of them. How often do you do them?
The Office
5?
of Cemetery Oversight has 5.
Okay.
Crematories that we currently regulate. We do them on initial when they first come in, and we do them every 2 years.
So the 5 that you have, you did it when they first came in, and then you do it every 2 years?
Yes.
Okay. Delegate, thank you so much. And Debbie, thank you for being with us, even though you are, not feeling well. We really appreciate you.
Thank
And
you
I
so
hope you
much.
feel
It's
better,
my
okay?
pleasure.
Delegate Gazzoni.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you did share that of the 47 regulated crematories, 42 are regulated by MDH and 5 by your office. Can you explain how those get divided out into the 42 and 5?
If the Board of Morticians licensed that operator, let me make sure I got the exact language for you. If the Board of Morticians is 51% is owned by someone that's a mortician, then the crematory falls under them. Otherwise, if it's on the other side where they're running a cemetery and they actually have a crematorium, then they belong to us, and it's only 5 of those currently.
Okay, and a quick follow-up, please. Thank you. So so this is an assumption on my part, so please let me know if I'm wrong on this one. The 21 crematory operators that you all licensed are under those 5?
Under those 5.
Thank
Yes,
you very
ma'am.
much.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I understand you just said you have one inspector. They inspect the 5 crematories once every 2 years. Is that correct? I just heard.
That's what you heard. Yes, sir.
So in 2 years, there's 560 business days. So what do they do in the other 555 days?
We have a lot of cemeteries that we also inspect and
Okay.
and work through.
So it's not just the crematories,
No,
it's
yes,
out in the
we have
cemeteries.
a bunch of cemeteries also.
Thank you.
Delegate Hill.
Thank you. Thank you for being here today. So following up on my colleagues' questions, the determination of which ones you have oversight on. Can you expand on that a little bit? And also, what would you need or what would you be asking for if you wanted to be able to do a more thorough job? Or do you think that that you're doing the job up to standards and code? Do you think it's appropriate that the responsibility for oversight is split between two different agencies?
That's a tough question. I think we'd have to go back and really sit to talk about that. I think it's working right now. To answer your question, it kind of goes back to you can always use more personnel, but we also want to be judicious in using the taxpayers' money and trying to make sure that we maximize what we have. As far as should all of them belong under one agency, I think that's kind of your question on the crematory. You're going to have cemetery operators then now under the board of morticians, so it's kind of which set of regulations they would fall under. So right now it's working from our vantage point, but I think as you go through this hearing, we'd be happy to hear any suggestions that you have.
Can I ask a quick follow-up?
Yes.
Thank you. So you said they're operating under different regulations. So maybe you can,
Well, I'm saying they've got the cemetery side and then they got the mortician side. So I've got some cemetery operators and they're operating under us for the cemetery piece, and then morticians, I think, believe have
Okay.
different.
okay, all right, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
So you have about how many cemeteries that you don't regulate the family private? How many are there in Maryland total, including the family private cemeteries?
Debbie, you have that number in front of you?
I'd be more than happy to answer that. Now, there are many cemeteries in Maryland, close to probably 6,000 of those, but the ones that the Office of Cemetery Oversight regulates, there are approximately 119 cemeteries that we regulate. About 14 of those are holding companies to those cemeteries, but there are 119 that we officially oversee.
Okay, so 119 that you officially oversee.
I'm sorry.
119.
Yes, it's 119 cemeteries that we regulate.
Okay. Any other questions? Seeing none, thank you so much, okay, for being with us. We really
Thank you.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, I would like to call the Maryland Department of Health, the Deputy Secretary for Public Health Services. Good afternoon. How are you, Nilesh?
I'm good, Chair. It's good to see you.
Nice to see you.
While we're getting the slides set up, just for the record, I'm Dr. Nilesh Kalyanaraman, the Deputy Secretary for Public Health, and going to be talking about our role within public health services in managing the heaven-bound crematory issue.
And will you be so kind and place the microphone closer to you? Thank you.
All right, happy to do so.
Oh, that makes a difference. Right, Delegate White Holland?
All right, so, we're here to talk about the crematory public health response that we had in relation to Heaven Bound. And there were 4 different parts of public health services that we tapped to address this: our State Anatomy Board, our Environmental Health Bureau, the local health department, Charles County Department of Health, and of course our AAGs. So we We first learned of the incident with Heavenbound on January 10th. There was an inspection by the Board of Morticians and Funeral Directors, and they had a number of findings that they reported via phone call to the Charles County Health Department that Friday afternoon. So the crematory's retort, the furnace was broken, remains were not being cremated in a timely manner. Not all of the remains were being stored under refrigeration, and there were sanitation issues. From our perspective, the local health department got more details that Monday, January 13th, alerted us at the state health department, and we brought together folks for a late afternoon discussion about this. From our purposes, there were a number of issues here that we needed to address, mainly that improperly managed remains and biohazardous materials were an imminent risk to public health. That should not be. And so under our authority to investigate possible health nuisances and serve abatement order, and also to summarily abate a nuisance if the property owner fails or refuses to do so, we plan to issue an order of abatement. And we did serve that the next day, and we gave them 72 hours to comply with this. And critically here, that was done under the authority. So the secretary or local health officers have the authority to issue that. And so that was done under the authority of the local health officer in Charles County. We also, as part of this, made the determination that at the end of this 72 hours, there were two things that had to happen. One is that the decedents who remained needed to be returned to the funeral homes from which they came from, or otherwise needed to be transferred to another funeral home to be able to make final arrangements for those families, and that the space needed to be cleaned up from any biohazardous materials. If at the end of these 72 hours, not all of those bodies had been claimed, they would then be unclaimed, and at that point, our state anatomy board would have the authority to take those bodies and then continue with the process of contacting families as appropriate and arranging for making final arrangements. On January 16th, a couple of days, 2 days into that three-day order, the Charles County Health Department investigators, along with the board, went out. For our purposes, we determined that there were 25 decedents there at that time. And some were in the process of being returned to the originating funeral homes or the District of Columbia. And when I say or the District of Columbia, the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in DC also contracted with this organization. And so, at that point, we didn't have confidence that all of those bodies would be transferred, but we were hoping that they could at least do that for as many as possible. On the 17th, we did our inspection, 72-hour inspection. There were still 18 decedents there. So we did serve a subpoena under the Secretary's authority to get records pertaining to those 18 decedents so that we knew who they were, what are the dates, next of kin, all the necessary information to be able to carry out the necessary arrangements. At that time, and I will leave this for the board to discuss, they summarily suspended the crematory permit of Heavenbound and the crematory operators as well, which meant that they couldn't do anything with those bodies anymore. They were not able to act, and so that's why these bodies were deemed unclaimed at that point. So on Saturday the 18th, the next morning, our state anatomy board went out and removed these 18 decedents from Heavenbound and sheltered them in their facility, which they do on a daily basis. And so from that point on, we meaning the state anatomy board, had these decedents and were reaching out to the next of kin to process their death certificates and to, once again, offer cremation services for free if that's what the families decided, or transfer the decedents to a funeral home or a crematory of the family's choosing. Essentially, it was the family's choice, and we would carry that out. And so by the end of that week, we had contacted 16 of those 18 families, recorded their wishes, and made the arrangements. And then it took about another week to get those last two families contacted. But at this point, we had dispositions on all of those 18 decedents, and we were also, while I'm talking about that, we were also making sure that that the environment there was cleared of biohazardous material and any public health risks, so bodily fluids, tissue, that kind of thing. We did notice on the 5th of February that there was progress in cleaning, but not full resolution. And so then on February 7th, we prepared a final checklist for them, for Heaven Bound, of what are the final things that needed to be done to clear that space of any biohazardous materials. When we went out on February 10th, so that was this Monday, we found that they had completed the cleaning. Any biohazardous materials were properly stored and sealed for pickup. And so from that standpoint, the abatement conditions were satisfied. We had possession of the bodies and disposition, and the place was cleaned. I think the final piece here is that if the facility is closed, the State Anatomy Board is prepared to take custody of any unclaimed cremains, so any ashes at the facility under their authority as well. But the facility hasn't been closed yet, so we are just monitoring that piece. So I think the key here is that while we in PHS don't typically have any interactions or in this space, in this instance where there was a clear issue both in terms of public health risk and decedents who were not being taken care of, we were able to and used our authority to quickly respond and manage both of those issues and bring resolution to those families and also protect the public health. And so with that, I'm happy to take any questions.
I'm going to open it up for questions now. Delegate Johnson.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Welcome.
Thank you for coming to answer questions today. So in that incident, I understand there were a slew of violations, not just the furnace. But so moving forward, now they were supposed to be inspected every 2 years. So moving forward, how do we ensure that those inspections are being done properly and that these violations don't happen again? And if they are, they're addressed immediately.
So that I'm going to leave for the Board of Morticians and Funeral Directors. So they have oversight of the crematory and for crematory operators. We were brought into this because frankly the operators weren't operating properly and what they were doing was posing a public health risk. So I'm going to leave that to them because that is under their purview.
Follow up, ma'am.
Absolutely.
So who oversees that board?
The Board of Morticians and Funeral Directors. So they are under the MDH umbrella, but they have an independent board like all of the professional boards, and that independent board provides oversight to the staff.
So does the MDH, do they have an obligation to make sure that board is functioning properly and doing their job?
So we mostly are managing actually the dollars, the budgets, but the board members are appointed by the Secretary of Appointments. We do not, MDH does not select the board members.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. I have Delegate Bagnall followed by Kaiser.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for being here. And I thought I heard you say that they're still open. So does the health department still have a role? Is there like a warm handoff as I assume if they're still open, that they're still potentially receiving remains and processing remains? And so is there like a process by which the health department remains involved?
So I'll leave this to the board to speak more to, but they did get, the crematory operator did have their licenses summarily suspended on January 17th. So they're not allowed to do that function anymore. So while the office may be open, they can't conduct those functions.
Oh, okay. Thank you for the clarity.
I have Delegate Kaiser followed by Shalega, followed by Bandari.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome.
What I think is a quick question, in looking through the timeline, at what point in the timeline, and maybe I missed it in here, were some of the board members let go?
I I believe that was in early February, right at the beginning, but I'm going to defer to the board on the exact dates on that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Delegate Shalega, followed by Bandari.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. I'm not sure whether you can answer this or the next panel. On page 3 of your presentation, the Board of Morticians and Funeral Directors inspected Heaven Bound, a funeral home, blah, 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 as a follow-up to an open probation from September of '24. So September, they're put on probation, and no one comes back until January?
That they're going to have to answer because
Okay,
I don't
we'll
know
ask
that.
them.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Delegate Bandari.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentations. I'm wondering what steps MDH is taking to prevent similar issues statewide. Are we doing unannounced inspection or enhanced coordination or penalties enforcement measure? What we are doing now?
Once again, I think that's going to be something that the board is going to be able to answer in terms of how they operate.
Thank you.
Vice Chair Collison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm a little confused about the line of authority here. I'm not sure what role, it sounds like MDH stepped in because of a particular issue, but necessarily they wouldn't be involved in that. It's all the board. But then MDH is, I think Delegate Johnson said, an oversight of the board. So and I feel like there was a gap here, and I'm not sure where the gap was. And Delegate Shalega pointed out there's a time gap for sure. So can you help me understand MDH's role overall of
Sure.
this process?
So I think this is the challenge we have with the licensing boards. It's the same reason that the Board of Nursing was transferred under the authority of MDH, right? There were issues there, and that transfer then allowed the departments to be able to actually work with the board, work through their issues. But without that, the MDH didn't have the authority to actually intervene in the operations of the Board of Nursing. And all of the other licensing boards are pretty much the same, right? They have an independent board that's appointed by the Office of Appointments. They hire their staff. And so MDH's role is really tracking the pins. And as I mentioned, we're tracking that, but we don't have any true authority over the work that is done by those boards.
Who does? Is it the governor's office?
I would say that it is the board that provides oversight to that staff, and that board is responsible like any other board, right? And then in this instance, I can't speak for the governor's office, but that's how these independent licensing boards work.
Okay. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
So, and thank you for being patient as we ask these questions. How did you become aware of it?
So I was informed both by my environmental health director and by the local health officer in Charles County, probably about 30 minutes apart, on January 13th, that Monday. And once I heard about it, that's when I pulled together our staff and made sure that we were responding to this as fast as possible.
And I saw how you handle it. Thank you for handling it and for helping the families to make sure that all 18 of them were contacted. Really appreciate it on behalf of the committee. Are there any other questions? Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. As we look at this issue, I will, keep you informed if there is any changes, as we discussed, the board, so that you can give us your insight as always, okay?
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. Have a wonderful day. Next, we have the Board of Morticians and Funeral Directors. I have the Executive Director, Erica Malone, Kenyatta Clinton, who's the President, Charlotte Hoffman, the First Vice President, and Andrew Liberto, Inspector Investigator. If you all can bring up a seat, and thank you very much. And everyone else that is waiting for the next briefing, which is the state's response to bird flu, if you could just be patient, we appreciate it, okay? Maybe this is the time to stretch, go get something to drink, but we'll be with you. So good afternoon. I would like to know who would like to go first, and thank you for coming to the Health and Government Operations Committee. We really appreciate your time. Who would like to get started?
Thank you and good afternoon. I can get started.
Thank you so much.
No problem. My name is Erica Malone. I'm the Executive Director at the Board of Morticians and Funeral Directors.
All of you, if you will be so kind and move the microphone closer to you. Thank you very much.
Uh-oh. Okay, so I'm going to begin with the overview of the board members. Our board is supposed to consist of 11 members. Right now, we have 6. And the executive committee consists of the president, first vice president, second vice president, and secretary. All newly appointed members. We have a complaint committee, which consists of a chair who is on location here, the president, and two consumer members on the committee, and then we have one of the secretary, and our inspector, and myself, and board counsel. I just wanted to note that the inclusion of consumer members in the executive committee enhances diversity and fairness. The previous committee did not have any consumer members, and the consumer members on the executive committee was recently added. Overview of the board staff. The board staff, our board is supposed to have 6 staff members. We are currently at 4, and that is of only 3 months ago. In 2016, we had a sunset review, and it was recommended that we have another investigator. We have only had 1 investigator in the time I have been with the board for almost 14 months. And prior to that, the staffing has been an issue. There has not been full staff since 2016 review. So we have 1 inspector and investigator for the entire state. We have 274 establishments. We have 57 corporations. We have 36 crematories. We have 11 restricted establishments, and we have 37 mortuary transport services, which all require inspections by our investigator, and we only have 1 who is also responsible for all of the complaints that are issued to the board. When I began in my position, we were backlogged. I noticed that we were backlogged approximately 300 establishments and inspections. And under the new administration of me coming on the board, 132 have been completed in the past year. Our staff is mandated. We are under the purview of the board. The executive director, I have no power in outside of what the board tells me to do. The board makes the decisions, and I execute the decisions. And then we receive written and signed complaints, and we conduct inspections under the orders of the board. So once again, the executive director is appointed, and we serve at the pleasure of the board. I manage the board staff and we perform administrative functions, and we carry them out on behalf of the board. So moving forward is regarding our complaints and inspections, updated FAQ page detailing disciplinary and complaint procedures have been added to our website, in addition to updating SOPs, which were not in place upon my arrival to the board, implementing an automated payment submission form, which we do not have at the current time, which will make an easier, streamlined process and reduce any delays associated with manual submissions. We have an automated, our goal is to have an automated platform for complaint submissions, allowing for efficient handling and tracking. And we're going to increase the frequency of our newly appointed complaint committee meetings, which were previously held once a month, to bi-weekly. And that way we can have better time resolutions. Establishing a compliance management chart, which I know other boards have because they have more staffing, and our staffing hasn't permitted, the lack of resources and staffing has not permitted it in the past. But hopefully, with the reevaluation of our budget, and hopefully we can get another, at least one more inspector, then we can have the compliance management where we can monitor licensees that have, any licensees that have disciplinary actions that will ensure adherence to regulations. And enhancing communication between agencies is a main issue that we have had, the lack of communication. Because we are a licensing board, we get a lot of consumer-based complaints. So but agencies that have any complaints against any licensed establishments or licensees, they can file complaints with us and we can follow up on those. And this will foster better collaboration and information sharing between agencies. In conclusion, in response to Governor Moore's directive, I personally and the board have been working with attorney Mr. Shearer, and he's been doing a comprehensive audit and operational review of our board, and the board has been fully cooperative, and we're working on advancements and changing things that have not been changed in the board, and were recommended back in 2016 during the audit review. And I'll pass it along to anyone else who would like to say anything.
Thank you. My name is Kenyatta Clinton, new president of the State Board of Morticians. Like Erica was saying, we're trying to change the board's ways, doing different things. Like she said, we're including more consumer members. Sure, sorry. Okay, sorry. My name is Kenyatta Clinton, brand new president of the State Board of Morticians. Like Erica was saying, we're trying to change the board's ways of doing different things, including more consumer members in committees, and then also the decision making as well when it comes to board voting and all. Anyone else have any?
By the way, I know you're brand new. When did you start?
Started board president last week.
Okay, brand new. Well,
Oh, I'm sorry, I appointed to the board in 2022.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
Hello, everyone. I have been in here a number of times, but Charlotte Persephone Hoffman, and I am here today as Vice President of the Board of Morticians. So, and I am a consumer representative to the board. I will tell you that I've been taking that role very seriously, and I'm mostly here to answer questions about the role of the consumer representatives on the board, as well as I am the new chair of our complaint committee. And you might, in case you're wondering how a consumer representative who's not a mortician became the head of the complaint committee, years ago, I worked at the Indiana Attorney General's office in their Division of Professional Licensing, where I investigated consumer complaints against licensed professionals, mostly doctors, nurses, et cetera, but also morticians and funeral homes. And so when this position came open and they were looking for, or when a consumer representative position on the board came open and they were looking for someone to represent like the LGBTQIA perspective on the board, they were particularly excited when they discovered that there was someone who met that niche and also actually had experience doing this work. I was appointed to the board in October of 2023, although the paperwork got a little lost behind the scenes. And so my first actual meeting with the board was about February of 2024 or so. And I've been serving with the complaint committee as well as some of the other committees. And as of the same time as Kenyatta was appointed or was elevated to president, I became vice president and became chair of the complaint committee. So I'm happy to answer questions about that process. I just wanted to give you a little bit of context about where I'm coming from so that you know what information I'll have.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it. Next, please.
Just going to introduce myself. My name is Andrew Liberto. I am the only inspector and investigator for the entire state of Maryland for the Maryland Board of Morticians and Funeral Directors.
Thank you. So I want to thank you for coming. I'm going to open it up for questions now. I'm going to start first with Delegate Hutchinson, followed by Bandari, followed by Johnson, followed by Kaiser for now.
Actually, two questions. One, just a yes or no. Is Heaven Bound open or closed now?
It is as a legal entity open, but it is not operating as a crematorium.
And will always be permanently closed, or do they have a chance to come back?
Unfortunately, we cannot discuss the details of the pending complaint.
Sorry about
that. At this moment, they are not operating as a crematorium because of the suspension of their license.
Thank you. Actually, my real question is for the inspector. I saw, I don't have all the numbers, but I saw like 274. What I'm curious about is how often do you get out and inspect your crematories and facilities?
Well, prior to our executive director, Erica Malone, becoming in effect, there was. How's that? Is that better? Okay. So, like I said, as since Erica Malone, our executive director, I have been going out daily, inspecting about 3 to 6 establishments a day. Prior to that, I was in the office for approximately 2 years, not doing inspections.
So, my previous question to the other organization oversight of the 5 crematories, would you think that 560 business days is an appropriate amount of time for one person to inspect 5 crematories and 120 cemeteries?
Are you asking for the Board of Morticians or for the oversight?
I'm just curious, do you think that 560 business days is an appropriate amount of time to inspect 5 crematories and 120 cemeteries?
No, I don't inspect. We have more than 5. So, I mean, I think you might be getting us mixed up with the cemetery oversight.
I am. I'm not getting you mixed up. I'm just asking your opinion on, is 560 business days an appropriate amount of days, in your opinion, based upon you doing inspections for your organization, an appropriate number of days to be able to complete 125 inspections?
In 2 years? My opinion, for one inspector, no. We need other inspectors, more inspectors.
You think they need more inspectors?
That's my opinion, yes.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
And I just to clarify, you said that before that you were 2 years not doing any inspection? Was that because of COVID or what was it?
Because of lack of staff. When I was hired and started back in December of 2021, March of 2022, the secretary of our office left, which left us down to 3 people. April of 2022, our executive director resigned. So that left myself and a licensing coordinator.
So in 2022, there were no inspection. In 2023, there were no inspections.
Correct.
So you started doing inspections in 2024?
Yes, I started in 2024 when Ms. Erica Malone, the executive director, came in. We started in 2024.
Okay, thank you for the clarification. I said it was Hutchinson, Bandari next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Piggyback on Delegate Hutchinson question on summary of the fact on page 4, I could see a potential regulatory gap being yourself only one inspector. My question to the board would be, given that the board has only one inspector, Andrew now, for the entire state, how does it plan to address the inspection backlogs? You have a backlogs as well, and ensure timely oversight of funeral homes and crematories to prevent public health risks in the future. What is your plan?
Well, what we've been doing thus far, we're going to continue. So we've been planning them geographically, the inspections, which is all we can do, because otherwise Andrew would be jumping around from the Eastern Shore to, Cumberland. So we've been planning it geographically. He is even times where he's had to stay overnight in certain regions so that we can cover all of the crematories and establishments, funeral homes in that region. So that has been working successfully thus far. If we have another investigator, we would definitely be able to get more completed.
Thank you.
So let me follow up on that. So you have one person doing all the inspections, right?
Yes.
No inspections in 2022, 2023. Can you tell us, how do you go about getting your pins? Is it put in the budget?
We're self-funded.
By the governor, or you're self-funded?
Yeah.
So
from what I've been advised on is that our board previously could not, it wasn't in the budget for an inspector or an investigator. That's why I'm currently in the process of getting the budget reexamined, and also putting in a request to possibly get assistance from the state. It's not in our statute too, but we have no other options.
Okay.
May I add something really fast?
Yes.
There has also been a freeze informally on licensing fees, which fund a lot of the board activities. We currently have a pending regulation requesting that some of those fees be increased. If that were to go through, then we would potentially have more funding to pay for a second investigator. But that has been something that the board, to my understanding, has been attempting to do for a number of years, but was told by the prior administration was not in the works.
Do you remember, if you can recall, and I know you're fairly new in the position, but if you can recall, when was the last time your board had an audit?
I'm actually we're about to have the exit conference on the audit. We're still undergoing the audit, and it's an audit from 2019 to 2023, prior to my arrival, but we're still undergoing that audit.
Okay. And I usually don't ask the questions, my members do, but I do have to ask this. Are you in the red or are you in the black right now?
We're in the black.
You're in the black?
Yes.
And you're in the black by a lot, a little? What does that look like?
We're one of the lowest funded boards out of 22 boards. So I think, we're on average of what it's looked like at least 2-3 prior fiscal years.
But you don't have enough to hire another inspector, right? You're in the black, but not enough for salary.
Correct.
All right, so are you in communications with the administration regarding making a request in the budget for
Yes.
help?
Yes,
You
our
are.
budget is currently being reviewed, yes.
All right, will you please get back to the committee and give us a status of that in the next week or two?
Yes.
All right? And thank you, committee, for being patient with me as I ask those questions. I have Delegate Johnson, followed by Kaiser, Chisholm, Shalega, Whitehallen, Lopez, Martinez, and Bagno.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you for coming to answer some questions. It seems like you have a lot of chiefs and not enough Indians. Andrew, you've got your hands full. I've got a two-part question. I was going to ask, how often do you do inspections? But obviously, there really is no time frame if you haven't done them for a 2-year period. So how long are you supposed to do inspections? What does your backlog look like right now? And what's your worst-case scenario for a crematory? So what's the longest one has gone without an inspection?
To answer your question about the longest that's gone out, I have seen back to 2016 was the last time they were inspected.
Okay. And your backlog now?
I just did the calculations. We're backlogged about 90. But as I stated before, when I started on the board, I realized we were backlogged approximately 300. So we've gotten as much as we could get done with limited staffing and resources. When I first started on the board, it was only Andrew and I. So when he's stating he was in the office, it was because there was no choice due to auditing purposes and adherence to policies and procedures. I could not manage doing licensing and manage the financial aspect of the licensing. So I needed him, and it was required he be in the office so he can handle that aspect.
And is there a regulation, a time frame that these crematories are supposed to be inspected?
Every 2 years.
Every 2 years? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Delegate. Delegate Kaiser, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My first question for Ms. Malone, when I heard you mention the 300 case backlog, and I think the chair was getting to the questions of the budgeting, but I missed the point. When you got there and noticed the 300 backlog, was there immediately a budget request at that time?
Yes. However, I cannot.
That's all I needed. That's
Okay.
All right. And then, thank you, Madam Chair.
Yeah.
My question for Mr. Liberto, you mentioned that you're now doing 3 to 6 per day. Can you describe, maybe not in gory detail, but can you describe what it takes for you to go to a crematorium, what it is you're actually doing to check them out?
Well, I have a list, or actually a report that I have to, so I walk in and announce who I am. I'm there for a random inspection. I follow my report, each page, collecting documents, looking at the facility and make sure everything is, clean, no hazards or anything like that. And then I, like I said, collect all the documents. And then, I do not make the determinations if it passes or fails.
Okay, Delegate? Okay. Delegate Chisholm, I'll come back to him. Delegate Salega?
Thank you. I asked a question before. The Board of Morticians and Funeral Directors had a probation on the crematory we're talking about in September, but then no action was taken until January or not. What can you tell us about that?
Actually, ma'am, I think we can't answer that question because that has to do with part of our,
Yeah, we're still in litigation, so it's very
Okay.
limited what we can discuss.
Okay. Are the owners of Heaven Bound Cremation Service are they licensed funeral directors?
Yes.
They are, okay. And did they serve the public directly? Or did you go through a funeral home?
I'm unsure of that.
Okay.
At least in most cases, they would have gone through a funeral home and then been sent there. I do believe there was an affiliated funeral home that did work with them more closely, but that's not under the investigation.
Okay. Thank you.
Delegate White Holland?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I want to follow on from Delegate Kaiser's question. And I know we can easily go back to 2016 when there was a recommendation to have an additional inspector, but let's start back at the point that she had elevated related to when you all discovered that there was this backlog. And so it would be helpful if you could expound upon what roadblocks, what challenges did you face when making these types of funding requests? As you'd mentioned that you had proposed or at least made the request. And so could you talk through what roadblocks or challenges you faced, when making those particular funding requests, and if you could offer any sort of recommendations on how best you would like to see those roadblocks removed for the future?
Very good question. Well, I know when I began my position, I was working 3 positions. So we already had 2 available pins that weren't filled. So I was currently as the executive director, and I also was the licensing coordinator, and I also was the secretary, which are also an intricate part in the staffing process. So I worked all 3 positions. So my request for an investigator and to create another pin was like, it's outside of the pins that we already had that needed to be filled. And and those pins had to be filled. And once I finally got to the point of filling those pins 3 months ago, just 3 months ago. So now I can put in my request for an additional pin and an inspector, but there has to be a reevaluation of the budget, the appropriation of certain fees and renewal fees that right now our renewals are, majority are on 1 fiscal year, which is even fiscal year. So they're trying to fix, so it has to be switched around where our renewal fees are split up and evenly between each fiscal cycle. And that way the budget can be reappropriated.
Madam Chair, just a quick follow-up. So you also talked about these licensing fees and renewal fees because you mentioned that you were a self-funded board. Can you just clarify the licensing fees come from whom exactly? Those that own or have managed the license, is that correct?
Our licensees. So anyone who owns a funeral home or an establishment altogether, and then also the actual licensees, they have to renew.
And about how many?
Altogether, we have about a little over 2,000.
Okay.
Between the licensees, and we also have mortuary transport companies, their vehicles, they have to, which also get inspected, but they have to have a license as well.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Lopez.
Madam Chair, and thank you for being with us here today. I think my question is probably best for Mr. Libretto. I understand you're understaffed. Help me understand what goes into becoming an investigator. Is there specific training that's required for that position? Do you have to be accredited in some way? What are the standards for employment?
I mean, I don't think there's any accreditations, but I think from knowledge of investigations, prior knowledge of investigations or that, and also training with the executive director and also reading over the statutes and the regulations that we have.
Gotcha. So this is a position that the board trains to fit the standards of the job?
Yes.
You're welcome. I have Martinez, followed by Bagnell, followed by Woods.
And I want to thank you guys for being here and presenting, but also stepping up in this moment where there's clearly leadership needed. And I feel bad, you guys are definitely in need of extra support in a year where we don't have a lot of resources to go around. But the work that you all do is really important for families and people going through really, really tough times. My question goes to those families, right? Is there a plan or something in place to improve transparency so that the public can see complaint history around funeral homes or around crematories, like so they can make better choices and be able to see kind of what's happening? I used to do work at the county level with 311, and having a complaint system, being able to see what's happening is really important, I think, moving forward.
So unfortunately, a lot of the things that we could do towards transparency, we can't actually do because of the way that statutes in COMAR regulate our investigations. So we have confidentiality around any open investigations, and there's lots of reasons for this. You don't want to have a situation where someone could, flood complaints on a single licensee that they don't like for some arbitrary reason, and then say, oh, this mortician has, 8 complaints against them. So there is a reason to have confidentiality while investigations are ongoing. There is potentially an argument for shifting some of the regulations on the back end to allow for more transparency as to what specifically was done in particular cases. But again, we're currently limited by the legal structure that we have.
Got it. And then last question. This is for Charlotte. What is the best legislative district in the state of Maryland?
22!
Good to see you. Good to see you, Brad.
I'm apparently the ringer for Delegate Martinez.
I am going to follow up on Delegate Martinez's question. And I want to say on behalf of the committee, I'm sorry, to the families for what you have experienced, because that's really important here. Really important, those 25 bodies, those 25 people, those 25 families, okay? So we're here, and I don't want you to, we're not attacking. I think everyone is being very, because it is a very respectful committee and people. But we do want to find solutions. So in that light, can you tell me, Charlotte, since you stated that the laws are drafted in such a way that constrains the board a bit, do you have any suggestions? Because we're in session for the next 54 days. So if we can make some changes to make life easier, we can do it now. Also, I know the governor's office is watching. They need to find money in the budget for some pins. We need to help that board while we're here. And I know you're gonna follow up and let us know in 2 weeks or so. So what suggestions do you have? If you don't have any at the moment, because I'm placing you, on the spot, don't want to do that, you can take the time and get back to us sometime next week with some suggestions.
And I'm happy to do that. There's at least one thing that's at the top of my head where, and I don't want to give the impression that this is the issue with this particular case because I cannot speak to this particular case. But I have seen that there have been situations where the complaint committee has debated whether to take a specific action, such as summary suspension, and then faced a provision in our statute that says that as soon as we issue summary suspension, the suspended licensee has the opportunity to appeal. And then once they file that appeal, the summary suspension is put on hiatus until the final decision. And so there has at time been this feeling that summary suspension is a tool that's available to us but not available to us at the same time. Does that make sense? Because we know that as soon as we take it, that all they have to do is file an appeal and then they can continue operating.
So what I'd like you to do is to, whoever has the authority, to please, when we're done with the hearing, I know we have another briefing, but I'm gonna step out and let my vice chair continue with the briefing because I wanna set up a meeting with you and council to see what we can do about it, okay?
Perfect.
I had next Bagnell, followed by Woods, followed by Riley, followed by Gazzoni, followed by Taveras.
And thank you all for your work. And I think this is just speaking to what our previous panelist also spoke to, and that's the question of when you see something going wrong, who do you go to? Because I know that we want to keep our boards somewhat independent, but this is a case where clearly, we saw that the train was coming off the tracks. And so what do you need to make sure there is someone that you can go to when you see that there's a problem coming, so that you can intervene before you're down to one administrator and one inspector?
A lot of our board is basically complaint driven. So before we can really act, we need that complaint first. Then that goes back to the board. We vote to recommend a recommendation to the open session to open that complaint. And then that's when we can send the investigator out. So, it's a process. It'd be nice if we could contact, other agencies to help us out here and there.
May I add something? Okay. So I think that there are also things that we could do to improve the complaint procedure itself, not just with the Board of Morticians, but more broadly with other regulatory boards. So at the moment, complaints are made to the board itself. And we have our own specific form that you use to submit those claims to us. And if we get a complaint that should have gone to a different board, we'll typically, close that complaint. And I'm trying to get into place a procedure so that we will routinely say, oh, this should have gone to the Office of Cemetery Oversight, or this should have gone to, the medical board or whatever board. In practice, that typically happens, but there's not a specific procedure that says, if we receive a complaint that should have gone to a different board, we do that. But we could, for instance, establish a procedure where there's a central, complaint mail room at whether at MDH or at the Attorney General's office or somewhere that receives all these complaints and then sends them to the appropriate agencies, so that you don't have to know that you have to contact the Board of Morticians to have a complaint about a mortician. You don't have to know that, oh, this particular crematory is licensed by the Board of Morticians, and that one is licensed by the Office of Cemetery Oversight. So that these things can be sort of moved around in a more appropriate way. We are also working to improve our connections with other departments. I can't speak much on the Heaven Bound case for all the reasons I said, or that have been stated. But one thing that I will say is that at the same time that we authorized the summary suspension, we also took a vote to authorize Erica to contact the Charles County Department of Health. So that is how the Department of Health got brought into this, was we saw the situation and we contacted them. I just wanted to clarify that for anyone who thought that it was like the Department of Health found it and brought it to us. It was the other way. So there are a lot of behind the scenes things that we could certainly do to improve this process and to ensure that communications don't break down. I've also heard about situations where, another government agency has investigated a particular, mortician or funeral home or crematory, et cetera. Again, I can't give names. And they then haven't relayed that information to us. And so we need to also make it strengthen the ability for communication with other agencies with us so that they know that we're here. So that if they have some issue with one of our licensees, that they know to tell us about it so that we can act. Because if we don't know about it, we can't.
And if I could just clarify.
Sure.
I appreciate all of that, and thank you. It's very, very helpful. I also mean when you see that there's an issue within the board itself, where you see that you've got a backlog, you don't have enough inspectors, you're down to an inspector who's acting as admin. What do you need? Who can you go to say, our board doesn't have what they need to function? And you don't have to answer that necessarily, because I think that's the overarching question right now.
It's a fascinating question because I don't know who we would go to.
It's no one to.
Yeah.
You have to figure it out. I was in this situation. I had to figure it out.
Because MDH doesn't actually have the authority to fix that, and the fact that the state hiring process takes like a year in some situations, which is frankly ridiculous, but that contributes to the understaffing, because I know for a fact that Erica was, from the moment she was hired, trying to fill those 2 vacancies, and she gave regular updates about them to our board meetings, and we heard all the ins and outs of all of it, and so the fact that it took so long was itself a problem.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. I have Delegate Woods, followed by Riley. You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I'm trying to wrap my head around this. And you may have answered my question, but I'm still stuck. And I want to ask it appropriately. My initial question was going to be, I heard you talk about when you go in and you do these assessments. I heard it asked and you explained, this is what I do when I go in, I'm checking the records, I'm checking the place. My question becomes, is there a prioritization? I don't want to be presumptuous because I'm hearing you say we don't get information from everybody. But when you have a said crematory who has at least 10 years of history of having problems, is there a prioritization? And I understand you saying when you're going across the whole state and you saying that you have some geographic, do it geographically. But when you have somebody that has 10 years of having problems and challenges, I mean, it's like, am I being presumptuous in asking, like, this was a known fact? Is that true?
If Drew, if you would allow me to answer, I do think that you can see this prioritization in the timeline where Drew did this investigation in March of 2024 that led to the suspension later in the year. And then less than a year after that initial investigation, at a time where we had a backlog of a severe number of cases, Drew conducted another investigation. So, March 21st, 2024 to January 10th, 2025, that's less than 10 months. So there was prioritization here. I wish There are lots of things about this I wish I could say.
That's understood. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Riley, followed by Gazoni, followed by Taveras.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, thank you. You've answered several of my questions, so I don't have to be guilty of asking more than one question. But anyway, so one that I still have, so the Deputy Secretary from MDH had mentioned that the only oversight that they have of your board, because you're kind of independent, is the budget process, the money. But then I heard Erica, I believe, say you're self-funded. So could you explain that a little bit? So you get a pocket of money from the Maryland Department of Health. And so the Maryland Department of Health so is that where we're going to say, hey, that department has to put in the pins for your board?
We don't get any money from the.
Oh, so you don't get
Department
any
of Health.
money?
Everything comes from the licensing applications, fees
Okay.
that we charge. Yeah.
Then I'll have to follow up with the Deputy Secretary on that, because I thought he had said that he was in charge of the budget.
They're responsible for, like you say, our pins. And
pins, okay, so the
they
employees.
oversee our funds that come into our board. But we don't get any funding from the state directly.
All right, thank you very much, appreciate it.
Followed by Taveras, followed by Hutchinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I also have had a couple of my questions answered, but I want to go back to where you are with staffing right now, because I think, Ms. Millen, what you said at the start was that you have 6 pins and only 4 people right now.
Yes.
But you also had hired a couple of people, so I'm assuming that means some people left also.
No, so when I started, we only had 4 pins available, one of the pins belonging to our investigator, one for executive director. Then there was one that was open for licensing coordinator and then for secretary. And those 2 pins were filled. The other 2 pins don't exist because if you don't use them, then they take them away. Yeah, but we're supposed to have 2 additional positions, one for a compliance manager and one for another investigator inspector.
Okay, thank you. Can I do a quick follow-up, please? Thank you, ma'am. I'm usually pretty easy. And this goes just for a clarification. Even though MDH sort of holds your pins for you, you're self-funding those pins?
Yes.
Thank you.
Delegate Taveras, followed by Hutchinson, followed by Rosenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I don't know if this was already asked, but, because I was away, but I see here that you received approximately 300 established complaints, and you have resolved 132, which is incredible. But approximately, like, what are the kind of complaints on average that you receive? And how long, what's the average time to conduct an inspection and investigate each of those?
Just to clarify, I think that number, the 300 and the 132, is inspections rather than complaints.
Okay, so let's do the inspections, and I would love a comparable number for the complaints as well. Like, what's the number of complaints on average you receive?
Where is it? Here it is. So, all right, so year to date, we've had a total of 24 complaints. We have 8 cases that were open and closed with no action. 9 cases were requested for response and closed with no action. We have 2 cases that were other, 1 case that involved a letter of education, 2 cases that went to the Attorney General's office, and 2 cases that were other. And that's year to date now. In 2024, we had a total of 35 complaints. In 2023, we had a total of 31 complaints. And in 2022, 33 complaints.
And I believe our rate for, like, closing those complaints averages to less than 30 days.
For each?
Yes. Now, there are some that take significantly longer, but the majority of complaints we're able to deal with rather quickly.
And the typical inspection is how quickly?
Takes anywhere between 45 minutes to an hour, maybe an hour and a half also, just depending on the, if there's a crematory also, along with the funeral establishment.
Okay, Delegate Taveras? Okay. Delegate Hutchinson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think my question is for the board president or chair. How often does the board meet?
The board is required to meet at least once a year, but we do it every month.
So you said that all the complaints have to go through the board. So if I had a complaint that, let's say my loved one is at a crematory, I have not received the remains back, and you just had the board meeting, that complaint wouldn't be acted on for another 29 days, and in that meantime, 25 bodies could be piled up and stored?
So it depends on the type of complaint. If it's that serious, we would call an emergency meeting. The complaint committee will meet. We will vote to open that case and then send it to the open session to send Drew out to do the investigation.
And that would all take place that one day, that like you had that meeting, open session?
Well, long as the emergency session, everybody's schedule comes together, and then we can meet. So let's say the complaint committee may meet today, and maybe we can have the open session maybe 2 days from now, something like that.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Delegate Rosenberg, followed by Vice Chair Collison.
I apologize if this has been answered already, but was there ever an evaluation for the budget committees or whatever internal review that pointed out the backlog or the lack of staff that went unanswered, in effect, that no substantive change was made as a result?
Not to my knowledge.
There was at least the 2016 audit.
Yeah, so not to my knowledge, not since the 2016 audit, and it wasn't brought to anyone's attention until my arrival on the board.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Chair Collison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I am so grateful for the chair sort of helping to look at where the issues are and how to resolve them. I understand that you don't always have pins and that you haven't had them in the past, and this board is relatively new. I mean, the executive director, president, vice president, or vice chair, whatever. But do you have, when you do have the pins, do you have a recruitment and hiring process in place where you're actually able to fill them in a timely fashion? I think I heard in one case it took like a year, do you have the processes in place that you can do it when you have the PIP?
Yes, yes, we have the processes in place. We go through HR, so they would post the position. It stays up for approximately 2 weeks, and after that, the normal hiring process. I get a list of applicants, of eligible applicants. I go through that list. I have to go through the interview process, contacting references, background checks and whatnot. Then it goes back to HR. They do their investigation, and then it comes back to me. I'd say, it took about 7 months for the first hire altogether. Yeah, about maybe 3-4 months for the first hire, another 3 or 4 months or so for the second.
So if you had more pins, you have the processes and capacity to be able to fill them?
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Delegate Shalega.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for second bite here real quick. I looked, Googled before I asked you, and the only report I could find was from a 2016 sunset review, and it sounds like they're in the midst of that for your next one. Is that what you said?
It's due in 2028.
Okay.
So we've, in the operational review that we're undergoing right now through the governor's office, under his directive, we've been reviewing.
That's a special review.
Yes.
What is your budget? It looks like from the 2016 report, it goes 1 year's higher than the other because you're biannual fee, licensing collection.
Right.
2017 was 850,000. Where are you now?
Since we have not finished this fiscal year, I don't have an exact number, but I just pulled them and we're around, I think, 325 or so.
So this must be the low year.
Yes.
So then the next year, so it looks like it's staying about the same.
Yes.
So you haven't seen any increase. 386,000 in 16 and 860 in 17. So you're still doing the
Yeah, it fluctuates.
back and forth. depending.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there were a number of suggestions in that sunset review that potentially it looks like were never addressed.
They were never addressed. A lot of the sunset review recommendations weren't enforced.
Thank you.
And it has been some time since our fees have been increased, so it is not surprising that the budget has remained relatively the same despite inflation.
Yeah, it said in the review that our fees are high compared to neighboring states, but this was 10 years ago. So, thank you.
And since you haven't increased it, you're probably pretty low compared to the other ones at this point.
There's at least one fee that we were shocked to discover was about $40 for life. And we were like, wait, what? So that's one of the ones that we're moving to.
Any other questions from anyone? I want to thank you for being patient as we ask the questions. Obviously, the committee wants to make sure that this doesn't happen again. The governor's office also wants to make sure this doesn't happen again. We want to find a solution. So this is how I see it. I would like you, before you leave, to go to my office next door, ask for Michelle Furman, and she's listening. And I want you to schedule a meeting with Delegate Rosenberg, who's the chair of the subcommittee, and the attorney for this subject matter, which is to my right, Ms. Lindsay Road, and my vice chair, please, and Delegate Hutchinson. I want you to meet and see if there's anything that we can do legislatively to get rid of some of that red tape, okay? But
To clarify, did you want to be in that meeting as well?
No, they will be in the meeting. The other thing I would like to do is, I know that, Nailesh, are you still here? I was thinking that, you know how this committee with the Secretary of Health, Dr. Laura Herrera Scott, who did an excellent job in helping the Board of Nursing. Remember how the Board of Nursing was a wreck? I think that perhaps the department can consider taking this board on for a couple years to straighten it out, helping them with getting some pins, making sure that the governor put some money in there for some of the pins as well. And we have to do this for a little bit to get it straight, because it's a mess. And I don't mean that disrespectfully to you, okay? They can't do it. They don't have the money or the help or the pins as well. So if you can also, Nailesh, talk to the attorney, Lindsay Road, Delegate Rosenberg, Vice Chair Collison, and Delegate Hutchinson, and have a separate meeting and see what we can do, because we have 54 days, I'm not counting, 54 days, and we can find a vehicle to put this bill in, or request it, and it'll go to rules, and I'll get it out of rules. I know the speaker will be, supportive, right? So if we could do that, I actually would like you to consider that, okay? As well. Any other questions from this committee? Thank you very much for being with us today, and thank you for your work. I know it's hard, and thank you for being here, okay? Facing this very tough issue. And again, to the families, very sorry for your loss, very sorry that you have had to experience this, but now that we're aware, we're gonna try our best to do something about it, okay? Have a blessed evening. We do now have a briefing on the state's response to the bird flu. And thank you for those that are on this next panel, for being patient, for waiting.
So this is all the same, and actually there's two.
Let's continue, please. If I may have Dr. K, Department Secretary Steve Connolly, Dr. Crum, Dr. Trout, Rachel Jones, if you can all come up and pull up a seat, please. And Dr. K, you can direct how you want it to go, please. And the way we're going to do it for the committee, if you see some people missing, they have other hearings in other committees, or they need to just take a little bit of a break. But this is being recorded, and we're going to, be listening to it. We're going to present, everyone will present, and then we're going to open it up for questions.
Okay.
All right, Dr. K, you want to kick it off?
That sounds good. Yes, I will. Thank you. We have here a panel from the Maryland Department of Health and the Maryland Department of Agriculture to discuss the bird flu issue, both the animal and the human side of this issue. And so first, I'm actually going to turn it over to my colleagues from the Maryland Department of Agriculture to talk about the animal side, and then Dr. Crum and I will take the human side of this.
Sounds great.
Sure. So, Madam Chair, Madam Vice Chair, members of the committee, Rachel Jones, Director of Government Relations for the Maryland Department of Agriculture. We do have here our Deputy Secretary, Steve Connolly, and our State Veterinarian, Dr. Jennifer Trout. And so today we're just going to talk to you a little bit, give an overview on the background of HPAI. We're going to talk about the current cases. We were provided with some questions in advance that the committee had, and so we're going to go through and answer those questions as the issues that pertain to MDH, and then happy to take any questions that you may have. I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Trout at this time.
Will you be so kind and full? The microphone really close to you. A little bit difficult to hear.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. Jennifer Trout with the Department of Agriculture. A brief summary of the cases that we have so far in the state. We have 5 commercial cases, all on the Eastern Shore, 2 in Caroline County, 1 in Queen Anne's County, and 1 in Worcester County. Out of those 5, 4 have had their control areas released, meaning there's no longer holds on movement of other birds in those areas, because in the infected premises has been depopulated, cleaned, and disinfected, and we're in the throes of composting them. Our other case in the state is a backyard flock in Montgomery County, and that flock has also been depopulated and is in a fallow period where that person is not allowed to have birds for 120 days while we're cleaning and disinfecting, or it has been cleaned and disinfected. So that way, once the weather warms up right, the weather will be able to help kill any virus that may remain in that backyard area.
Madam Chairman, Steve Connolly at the Maryland Department of Agriculture. I know that one of the questions also dealt with cattle, And we're lucky enough in the state of Maryland, we've not had any lactating dairy cattle that have tested positive for high-path avian influenza. There's been a lot of cases in the West. California's been hit exceptionally hard with high-path avian influenza, as well as states like Idaho and South Dakota and Michigan, with high-path being tested within lactating dairy cattle. We do have a secretary's order in place for interstate shipment of dairy cattle into the state, interstate shipment of lactating dairy cattle into the state. They have to have a certificate of veterinary inspection plus a negative avian influenza test within 7 days of being moved into the state, as well as we are in the process of testing at the farm level on a weekly basis milk that goes into commerce to make sure that it's free of the disease. Our focus really is making sure that if we find sick animals, that we are able to get them segregated away from the healthy animals and let them recover. Dairy cows do recover from the disease, but it's an issue that we're surveilling on a regular basis.
So one of the things that we want to emphasize is that avian influenza, or HPAI, it's prevalent in wild birds. It can be spread easily through eye secretions, nasal secretions, and manure. And that's why we encourage proper biosecurity methods for our commercial operations and for backyard flocks, because that will cut down on the spread based on droppings that may fall from wild birds in areas where there are flocks. And so we have 5 response steps that MDA utilizes in coordination with an interstate incident command. So that's Pennsylvania, Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia as well, right? Virginia as well. We have an interstate joint information center and an incident command that handles responses to these HPAI cases in the Mid-Atlantic region. And so there are 5 phases of the, do you want to start, Dr.
Sure. So when we have an outbreak or an infected premises, we quarantine that farm immediately. Then we work on the removal of those infected birds. So they are humanely euthanized. They are then composted on farm. And then we also work on virus elimination at that farm as well. That control zone that we set up, that all of the farms in that area then have quarantines on them or hold orders, and those hold orders are in place so that those birds cannot move without avian influenza testing twice within 48 hours before they go to slaughter, with one of those tests being within 24 hours. In addition to that, we also have a surveillance zone, and birds in that zone are also tested before they can go to slaughter. That's done routinely, but they are tested every 2 weeks as well, from 21 days and older. So that's the way that we help control the disease and the spread in that area.
Yeah, and the key to a lot of our response is actually the testing and surveillance of the birds that are in the surveillance zone, which is a zone that goes out 20 kilometers. We're part of the WOA, which is the World Organization of Animal Health, which uses the metric system. So it's a little over 12 miles or 20 kilometers to surveillance zone. Within that surveillance zone is a control area at 10 kilometers or about 6.2 miles that we do extra surveillance and testing.
And so to go through some of the questions that were asked by the committee in advance, the first was, what is the expected reduction in poultry production, both broiled meat and eggs, due to bird flu this year? So since 2022, almost 158 million birds have been affected, including wild aquatic birds, commercial poultry, and backyard flocks. So birds in all 50 states and 1 territory, with a total of 1,556 cases. There are 961 dairy premises in 17 states affected with HPAI. The second question was, what measures are industrial farmers taking to mitigate the spread and properly trace the disease? And so, as we've talked about a little bit, we spend time trying to, in conjunction with MDH and DNR, make sure that we are educating not only Maryland farmers, but also hunters and folks who deal with wildlife management. We make sure that we talk to them and educate and put out press releases to those that are following our newsletter, and also those who are registered with backyard flocks. We are also able to notify them through our press releases and emails about the use of foot baths when entering a poultry house or coop, or dedicated specific footwear to wear if they're going into a barn or a backyard flock area. We also encourage regular hand washing and changing of clothes and shoes every time you visit they visit a farm site. And so DNR has also partnered with us to make sure that they're making hunters aware as well, simply because sometimes they are in areas where they are hunting wild birds, and if they don't utilize proper biosecurity measures, they can be taking back HPAI unknowingly on their shoes or on their clothes or what have you. The next question was, are there any available antibiotics that could reasonably protect a flock of chickens from bird flu?
So antibiotics are ineffective against a virus, so no, in simplicity. The other thing is there are no antivirals approved for use in poultry, so that's not an option.
Next question was, does the Department of Agriculture have the location and size of all the chicken farms in the state and of all the beef farms in the state? The state. The answer to that is yes. We do keep data on the commercial broiler operations and registered backyard flocks. There are about 8,119 non-commercial flocks that are registered in the state of Maryland, so that might be if your neighbor. We did this briefing for the E&T committee a couple of weeks ago, and I know there was a question about, your neighbor in a townhouse could have a backyard flock if they wanted to, and some folks register those with us and others don't. Beef farms have premise ID, and MDA does know the location of beef farms in the state of Maryland. If they are a concentrated animal feeding operation, or CAFO, or they have a nutrient management plan, we do know the approximate size or scale of the operation, but only in those cases. The next question was, what would be the potential economic impact to the state if poultry production was reduced by 10, 25, or 50%? So agriculture remains Maryland's largest commercial industry. It drives more than $8 billion in our economy every year, providing jobs to more than 350,000 people. With the 500 commercial poultry operations and, poultry farms and Maryland poultry farmers that we have, they've raised about 287.3 million broiler chickens in the year 2020 alone, and so we do anticipate that that's probably increased over the past 5 years. In 2020, this is the last year for which we have that specific data, but the industry was responsible for as much as $6.7 billion in total economic activity throughout the state, creating and supporting as many as 26,477 jobs. And so that's a substantial economic impact. And then what happens, as Dr. Trout has already shared, when an operation does have a positive case and the birds have to be depopulated, and then there's a restriction on when they can bring in more chickens, that then means that that operation for at least 1 or 2 cycles of chickens that they would have typically raised and sold to market, that means that they're missing out on that revenue. They may have to hold off on paying additional workers during that time if they're not bringing in revenue, or if they don't have the sustainability to do that during that time. And so there is a significant financial impact to farms. However, the USDA does have a reimbursement program for which they will reimburse farmers who have had a loss of their birds due to HPAI. Given some of the current federal freezes on several federal funding sources, right now those reimbursements are kind of on hold, and so we are hoping that they will be resumed sometime soon. But again, that's an economic loss to farmers and farm operations whenever there's a positive case. We're going to defer the next question to MDH about workers being tested. The The next question was, what measures are currently in place to test cow herds for bird flu, particularly since the bird flu has been shown to reinfect certain cows? I believe, Dr. Trout, you touched on that a little earlier. I'll let you.
Sure. So right now for the state, we're doing an on-farm bulk tank testing program. We released an order the beginning of January. This comes a month after the USDA released a federal order for silo testing at the processor level, and we decided to be a little more robust in our testing in the state. So all dairies in the state, whether they are cattle, sheep, or goat, are being tested, and whether they are conventional dairies where they ship to a processing plant, or they do on-farm processing, or they are a raw milk / pet food dairy, are all being tested once a month to twice a month. And then in addition to that, as we talked about earlier, any lactating cattle leaving the state or entering the state also have to be tested before they can leave or they can enter. And then our surrounding states are doing the same thing. Virginia, Delaware, West Virginia, and Pennsylvania are all doing testing at various levels as well.
And then I'll just add that on December 31st of last year, MDA and MDH, the secretaries both signed a joint order governing mandatory testing of milk from Maryland dairy farms, just to ensure an extra precaution there. The next question for MDA, what can be done by local health agencies? Oh, sorry, no, that one's also for MDH. Sorry. So the next few questions then are for MDH, and so we'll turn it back over to Dr. Kaunirama.
So I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Crum to go through our portion of this.
All right. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for members of the committee to have us here to talk about high-path avian influenza. And just to start off, really kind of focusing on the public health aspect and where we are, kind of where we've been, and really trying to highlight some of the actions that the state health department has already taken, as well as our partners at the local level. So as it was stated before, we've been dealing with high-path avian influenza for a number of years now. And in early spring of 2024, that's when we first started reporting the detection of sporadic cases in humans that were associated with infected either poultry or dairy cows is really when we really started to see that. As of yesterday, there were about 69 confirmed human cases of H5N1 in the United States. These are part of an ongoing outbreak, and again, it's primarily involved with exposure to infected poultry and dairy cows is where we're seeing it. The bottom line really up front for us here in Maryland is we have had no high-path avian influenza or H5 detections in humans to date in Maryland. Yes, exactly. And there's a lot of effort to ensure that continues that way, and I'd be happy to get into it here. But some of the key points that I really wanted to share regarding the public health risks of H5 or avian influenza. At this time, CDC considers the human health risk for the general public to be low. This is mainly a disease or an infection that's going to be associated with prolonged, unprotected either work or recreational exposure to either affected wild birds, poultry, or infected livestock, that being cows or goats, including maybe the carcasses, the feces, or really the contaminated environment. And really involving dairy cattle or lactating animals, it's the raw, unpasteurized milk is the highly infectious agent there. At this stage, though, I'm happy to report that we have seen no person-to-person transmission of H5N1 in the United States. Also, the current testing that we have, all the surveillance and the testing can detect this H5, and these current antivirals that we have are shown to be an effective treatment modality. So those are one of the things we really want to go. As far as signs, for the most part, we have had one exception. Unfortunately, we've had one fatality associated with infection, but the signs have been mild. It's showing mainly upper respiratory infections or conjunctivitis. So an influenza-like illness, but really, again, they've been on the mild side, which is good. Now, in response to that, as soon as we started having detections throughout the United States, Maryland here has actually started to implement our own Maryland highly pathogenic avian influenza plan. This was a tailored plan that's actually been built on CDC recommendations and is really tailored to focus on human exposure and really the infection prevention and control measures. So it's intended for both state and local health departments to ensure we have an efficient and an effective response in Maryland. And that really involves that close coordination that was discussed earlier with our partners in agriculture, and really kind of constitutes what we consider that One Health response. Animal health and human health are really ultimately or intimately associated, so one without the other, really we're not going to have an effective response. So it's that coordinated coordination as well as work with our animal health partners that really ensures success. Now, this plan, again, also conducts, in addition to this plan, we've also conducted state-to-state communications. This is a regional issue. This is something that doesn't stop at state borders. So as mentioned before, we have a lot of communication with our partners in Delaware, in Maryland, Virginia, DC, to ensure that these lines of communication stay open regarding any human cases or any relevant information, and making sure that we're sharing that information in a timely fashion to make sure that we're all aware. Now, what is the department currently doing right now regarding surveillance? As I mentioned, we need to be able to keep an eye on this, see where we're going. We are actively conducting active symptom monitoring. For any individual, say USDA worker that's a Maryland resident that's involved in the response at other places in the country, when they return home, we are notified. We work with our local health partners to follow up with them for 10 days. If any symptoms develop that are consistent with influenza, or we're worried about potential infection, our local health departments facilitate access to testing. We conduct testing in our public health lab, and if positive, which we have not had any positives to date, we can ensure access to prophylaxis and appropriate therapy. We also conduct year-round statewide surveillance for anyone with lab-confirmed flu that is hospitalized. Any individual that is showing severe manifestations of influenza, we are going to be looking at that. We want to be able to make sure that subtype. I don't want to get too technical here, but when you're looking at the flus, if it's an influenza A positive, you want to be able to subtype to see if it is indeed influenza A, a seasonal flu, or if it's one of these avian flus. And our public health lab is working with the clinical and the diagnostic labs and the hospitals within this area to get those specimens to make sure, in addition to the routine surveillance, this enhanced surveillance can occur and make sure we catch them that way. Also, there's a lot of information going out to our clinicians. We send out clinician letters. We do webinars with our acute care facilities to make sure that this stays on the clinician's radar, that they know how to ask or who to ask if a specimen does need to be collected, and make sure all the logistics are actually done properly so we can actually test in an efficient manner. And then, as Dr. Trout mentioned, as well as Deputy Secretary Connolly, we have that mandatory testing of regulated raw milk. We want to be able to detect it if we do have a detection in the herds here, be able to make sure that our workers are safe, make sure they have access to the appropriate information, PPE, and testing if necessary. The other questions that came up were regarding with local health departments. In addition to what we're doing at the state, what can be done at the local level to help mitigate risk? Again, there's a lot of work that's currently going on with this, but as I stated, right now, H5N1 is primarily an animal health issue. This is something that we're watching very, very closely, and again, we're taking these routine preparedness and prevention measures in the case that this virus does change and actually starts to promote a greater human health risk, that being that human-to-human transmission that we haven't seen. But our local health departments are actually working with us to provide, as I mentioned before, access to flu testing, that post-exposure prophylaxis or antivirals, and treatments to those either farm workers, responders, or the federal workers that are returning from home, from responses in other parts of the country to actually get access to either testing or treatment if necessary. They've also been essential in providing personal protective equipment to those farmers, workers that Maryland's agricultural community that does not have direct access to it. Likewise, the provision of the seasonal flu vaccine. Now, a seasonal flu vaccine does not prevent avian influenza, but again, it will help with that potential for what we call reassortment. If someone is infected with the avian flu and seasonal flu, there's a risk that a new flu can develop. And that seasonal flu vaccine is one of the key steps to help kind of minimize or mitigate that risk. Also, they're encouraging these biosecurity practices, trying to get information out to the local and their constituents about ways they can protect their backyard flocks and, again, protect Maryland's agricultural industry. And then really providing the basic tenets of public health. good hand hygiene, making sure that we're washing our hands, making sure that we're getting our seasonal flu vaccine. And finally, if people do have contact with birds or we're worried about potential avian flu, they know who to contact. Contact our local provider or their local health department so we can provide access and get that started. So that's just kind of a brief overview of the situation regarding public health, what the state is doing and what we're continuing to do, and then with our partners at the local health department level, a lot of the actions that are there. Some of the additional questions that have come up, again, is what measures are there to test workers for bird flu and how often are these measures implemented? Again, at the Department of Health, we understand that rapid detection and characterization of viruses really is that critical component. You know, really being able to identify that virus, provide the therapy, and make sure that it doesn't gain a foothold in Maryland. Again, we're working with our partners in Maryland Department of Agriculture, as well as Department of Wildlife, or again, DNR, really using that One Health approach. If there is any suspect or suspect bird die-off, or if we have any issues associated with poultry or backyard flock, we actually have regular communication to ensure that we can have that collaborative response, again, utilizing the plans that we have directed by our federal partners and really working together. Right now, as far as testing workers, unless there is a detection at the farm or suspect animal disease, routine testing of workers for asymptomatic workers is not recommended at this time. So full testing really does involve people that have they meet specific testing criteria. If they have prolonged unprotected contact with a confirmed or suspect animal, again, if they've been involved with the response, if they have contact to a human case somewhere else in the country, again, there are specific criteria that really help that testing. But as far as just doing asymptomatic or screening testing, that is not recommended at this time. As far as testing goes, I think we've tested about maybe 10 or 15 people to date. The action and the infrastructure is in place. It does work. And I'm happy to say that a lot of the planning and the work has gone forth to really assist with that. So that's just kind of the general things. I think I'd like to potentially turn it back to Dr. Kalyana and see if there's additional questions or see if we can have going back and forth.
So I think that is the end of our prepared comments, so we're happy to take any questions.
I want to tell you thank you. You answer each and every question that we sent. And I want to thank a friend of mine, his name is Richard, who sent me a text and said, you guys need to get on top of this and send me all these questions. And I sent it to Erin, and she probably thought I was nuts. But you guys answer them all, so thank you very much. I'm going to let the committee now ask questions. I have Delegate Hutchinson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you all for being here on a Friday afternoon. It's actually been a fascinating afternoon in HGO. But more importantly, I really want to thank all of the departments. I've had cases in 3 of the 4 counties that I represent, not only the Department of Ag, but how the coordination's been with DNR and MDH has been superb and well done overall. Rachel, you were talking about the USDA reimbursement for the affected farm. But if I'm correct, though, if other farms that are in the radius that may have to delay or shut down or may have economic damages as well, they're not covered under that program. Is that correct?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's, before I get told to move it closer. That is absolutely true, that the index farm will get indemnity for cleaning and disinfection, and also the owners of the bird will get an indemnity for that bird based upon the type of poultry it is and the age of the poultry. The farms that are in the control zone may not be able to get chicks back in a normal rotation that they have in a layout. Normally there's a couple, 3 weeks layout between flocks that allows the farmer to get his farm in preparation. But farmers that are in the control area do not get any indemnification. However, the Delmarva Chicken Association has been working really hard to get some sort of risk management tool in the next farm bill that's was just extended, and that's really where some effort should be, is to try to get a program to provide some risk management tools for
all growers that may be caught up in avian influenza type quarantine, that of no fault of their own, but it's just the circumstances. And I believe that actually Congressman Harris we've talked to him about, Secretary Addix has talked to him about potentially seeing if what tools USDA could provide.
Excellent. Thanks for being here. Really appreciate it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
My pleasure. I have Delegate Gazzoni, followed by Bandari, followed by Collison. Vice Chair.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think this is a record for me in questions in one day. I have some curiosity about the wild bird types, and sort of if we know that it's more, what kinds of birds that may be more prevalent or less prevalent. And then secondly, for anyone that's out there duck hunting, does one get to eat the ducks or no?
So wild bird wise, we're really concerned about wild waterfowl, and we're concerned about eagles, vultures, turkey buzzards, any type of bird that enjoys feasting on their fellow bird friends.
Scavengers.
Yes, so those type of birds, and then if you were to go out duck hunting and you came home with, your duck breasts, as long as you cook them the way that it's recommended, 165 degrees, you should be perfectly fine. We also really encourage people that are hunting to think about biosecurity, right? It's not just commercial poultry farms or backyard flocks. You could be a hunter and also have a backyard flock, so that whole changing your shoes, not wearing your hunting gear in to feed your flocks is really important and crucial.
Thank you.
Yep.
Delegate Bandari, followed by Vice Chair Collison, followed by Bagnell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With Maryland recently reporting these HPI cases, many of them did a great job talking about targeted surveillance program and steps taken to prevent potential transmission to human. How is the state ensuring public awareness and safety regarding poultry consumption and handling? This is a health department. What should we tell to our constituents?
Sure. Right. So it's a great question regarding, food safety and what. As of right now, as far as the food supply, poultry, as Dr. Trout mentioned, if cooked properly to 165 degrees, there is no issue or worry associated with high path avian influenza. Same thing regarding eggs. Again, with the way the safeguards that are involving inspection, our federal partners working, as well as a lot of the safeguards, if it is detected on the farm, those eggs aren't going to be leaving. Same thing with the chickens. They are not going to be leaving. So having sick or contaminated food entering into the regulated food market is not going to happen. And again, our Office of Food Protection, as well as other constituents within that, have really tried to make that apparent in a lot of the social media and a lot of the information we have on our websites. That's one of the biggest things we want to do, is the food supply is safe at this stage.
Thank you.
Sure.
If I may add, just for a moment, milk is also the other issue that comes up, and pasteurization, the commercial pasteurization process renders the milk safe. It's part of why raw milk, we have concerns with raw milk in general, but even now more particularly with the H5N1, because of its transmissibility through milk and in the dairy setting, is even more of a concern.
Bagnell? Delegate Vice Chair Collison, your question was asked. Okay, Delegate Bagnell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for this report. And I know that we appreciate that you're all coming together, because this is a public health concern, but it's also an agricultural concern, and I think it's also a big concern for our ecosystem, right? And I wanted to ask how much, because you had spoken to, our federal partners, and so I quickly went on to look at the Animal and Plant Health Inspection Service, which is housed right here in Maryland, and the website is gone. So how much is the state stepping in? Like, are we creating a dashboard? Because we know that the CDC dashboard is now gone. It appears that this website is gone. And so if you could just speak to how we're reporting the state so that we can make sure that we're staying current, not with just what's happening in Maryland, but as it relates to our overall agricultural and public health concerns.
Yeah, Delegate, if I may, I went on they have a specific, at APHIS, a specific website that tracks the both poultry infections, infections in livestock, infections in wild animals, and infections in other mammals, because there are some other mammals that can get infected with H5N1. I went on it at like 10:30 today.
Okay, so maybe it's the.
Yeah, so I would just suggest that you Google HPAI APHIS, and it should bring up that website. For the poultry side, they update it about once a week with what county, how many animals, whether it's backyard flock, whether it's a commercial operation, what type, whether it's broilers or turkeys or egg layers. It gives pretty good information. And it also does the same for dairies. It shows a map of where the most recent last 30 days outbreaks were, and from outbreaks from all the way from 2022.
Oh, perfect. So we do have a dashboard.
Yeah, it's a fair amount of information there.
Okay, and maybe it's just the Wi-Fi in this room. That's entirely possible.
Well, don't know.
And if I could just follow up, you had spoken to the raw milk, but you had spoken to regulated raw milk testing. What is that for direct sale, or is that for processing? Like what is the raw milk that we currently regulate?
So the testing that we're doing in the state is for what you would buy in the grocery store. So that comes from My Dairy, Your Dairy, goes to a processor within the state, that's sampled. But we are also sampling anybody that does on-farm processing. So if you went to Brooms Bloom in Bel Air, Maryland, we're sampling their milk as well. And then those people that do raw milk sales for pet food, that's getting sampled also. So we're trying to cover all the facets.
Yeah, and if I could just add also, like when a milk truck comes to a farm to pick up their milk from their bulk tank, they take a milk sample now for quality control, because they're going to check for things like antibiotics and somatic cell counts, protein that goes to the milk plant's quality control area. After that sample is used at the quality control, there's going to be some milk left over. We're getting the remainder that sample to be tested at our Salisbury Animal Health Diagnostic Lab. We want to have the least impact on the farmers we can, but at the same time have good surveillance.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. I have Delegate Taveras.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I woke up to a rooster the other day, but that's not real different up in my hood. But what's the likelihood that we could be able to access the bird flu from these chickens and whatnot, and roosters that are in the community? That's the first. And how comparatively, I know that back in the day, I used to not prosecute, but I enforced environmental legislation on nitrates in milk, in the milk industry. Well, or any industry that was not reporting the appropriate otherwise production or use or whatever of nitrates in milk. And the dairy industry got caught up in that. And so I'm reading here that it could infiltrate the groundwater feed, fertilizers, cleaning chemicals. How is that comparable to, what's the likelihood of getting that versus the bird flu? The presence of that versus the bird flu?
I'll take the first question. Your first question about backyard flocks and the likelihood, I will say to date this year, we've only had the one backyard flock incident, and that was in Montgomery County. And while we can't directly state for a fact, we will say that the gentleman who reported that flock to us and reported his birds dead let us know that he had been, when he called it in, when he first noticed he had dead birds, he let us know he had been hunting in Dorchester County the weekend before and had gone straight home into his backyard and started, feeding his backyard flock. And so we strongly suspect that that's how that case of birds came to be positive with HPAI. Otherwise, we don't necessarily see it as often in backyard flocks as we do in commercial operations. Who wants to take the next question?
I don't know.
So these are my thoughts on that. Nitrates in milk, that has been an issue in the past. We now have, concentrated animal feeding units, nutrient management plans, things like that, that I think have really helped reduce the level of nitrates in milk. And then when we talk about avian influenza does not like heat. It's kind of a cold weather guy. So again, pasteurization is fantastic, and we know that that can kill the virus. So, when we have discussions with our sister agency in MDH, we really recommend push pasteurization of milk and not the consumption of raw milk, and that includes not letting your cats consume raw milk, because we know that we can transmit it to cats that way. So I think, honestly, I wouldn't be concerned about either of those issues, knowing the regulations that are in place now for nitrates and also knowing that pasteurization can destroy the viral load, so.
Oh, thank you, that's wonderful.
Okay. Any other questions? Oh, you have the one last question.
I'm wondering, I know like in 2020, when I was looking the report, this poultry industry contribute over $6 billion to our economy. And now this outbreak affected over 600,000 birds. And definitely farmers are facing this financial losses from culling. Therefore, we have the eggs are very, very expensive, decontamination to production downtime. And what is your message to the farmers who are watching this? What financial assistance or any relief programs or that we do have, and how much is the economic damage to poultry that's because of this industry? How is that affecting our state economy? Do you guys have any data?
My message to our poultry growers is use good biosecurity. The state of Maryland will respond with our partners at USDA and the other states and the poultry companies and the Poultry Association. We will respond immediately, try to have the shortest time period of inconvenience for them as possible. I think we've had a pretty good track record. This incident in 2025, and I think most of the poultry companies have been pretty happy with the turnaround time. It's 680,000 chickens is a lot of chickens, but the capacity in Maryland for poultry is around 60 million birds. So I think the economic impact, there will be an economic impact, but any one day, there's capacity for about 60 million broilers in the state of Maryland. So I think that even though this is a major impact for the index farm and the neighboring farms, I think that we're going to be able to keep the layouts between flocks to a reasonable amount of time. And with broiler chickens, which is the great thing about broiler chickens is they rotate out somewhere between 49 and 60 days for growth, depending on the size of the bird that you're trying to raise. And if we get the control areas released as soon as possible, that's safe, we can get, bless you, we can get to the chicks back in and back in production.
Thank you.
I don't see any other.
Delegate
Oh, Delegate Rosenberg.
Thank you, Madam Chair. You just mentioned that you work with USDA on this issue. Have personnel changes there had any effect on your ability?
Well, you'll be surprised at the answer. No, we have not noticed any change at all. Maybe we're working with people lower down in the functions at APHIS and USDA's Wildlife Services, but from the first incident that started actually in Kent County, Delaware, through today, we've not noticed difference in the personnel. And we have a cooperative agreement with APHIS that helps fund the response. We've got approval of our pre-award, and we've submitted our cooperative agreement and expect it to be approved very soon. We did have some of the computer systems, the payment systems were delayed for a few days, but everything's back up and running. It's like business as normal.
Thank you.
Okay, I don't see any other questions. I just want to thank you for being so thorough, for being responsive to the committee, for being with us today. I think that, how is it that the saying goes, an ounce of prevention, how does it go?
Yes.
Is worth a pound of what? Of cure. So we know that hopefully it won't come, but we know that some places have it already, right? So we need to stay ahead of it, especially to, help our farmers and our citizens in Maryland to make sure we stay healthy. So I want to thank you in advance for the work that you're going to be doing and the work that you're doing, okay? And you have a blessed weekend, and thank you. You're welcome here anytime, all right? Take care.
Thank you.
For the committee, this is it for Friday. It is 3:47. Sorry, I thought I could get you out earlier, but they were important hearings, right? So thank you for your questions and for being involved, and I hope you have a blessed weekend. Take good care. Bye-bye. Can you take us